Hello, I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and this is a review of Episode 8 of the Fallout TV show. As with the first 7 videos in this series, I intend to cover each of the sections of the episode in turn, giving a broad strokes plot summary, a listing of the good, the confusing, and the bad aspects of each section. I'll also detail anything I think is lore-breaking and anything that has been added to the lore of the universe. Lastly, I'll get to the character details given in each section for each character. That being said, let's get started. Maximus is carried by Vertibird to Philly, which has recently been conquered by the Brotherhood of Steel. Once there, Maximus presents the false head of Dr. Wilzig. When his deception is discovered, he faces execution for his failure and for the death of Knight Titus. As the sentence is about to be carried out, Dane tells Elder Cleric Quintus that they harmed themselves. This gives Maximus the opportunity to promise to lead the Brotherhood to the true head. In private, Quintus tells Maximus that he plans to build a new brotherhood with himself at the head and those like Maximus as his sword. On to the good aspects. The atmosphere of this scene was perfect. Maximus, with signs of a struggle on his face, kneeling in the Vertibird, dreaming of a life with Lucy while he flies to a likely death. The filthy streets of Philly overrun with Brotherhood troops. Quintus sitting like a lord on his throne. Maximus standing before a crowd of brothers. All of these were great. I also liked that we saw some intrigue in the Brotherhood and Quintus scheming. While I liked this scene, I did have some questions about a few things. There were 3 vertibirds approaching the radio station in the last episode. We only see one here. Where are the other 2? Also, why did they fly past the Philly Plain Tail sign? I know this is a basic callback to a location Lucy passed days before, but she was coming past this sign from the coast, and that is not where they picked up Maximus. Next, why does Elder Cleric Quintus have such trust and faith in Maximus? It's clear from this scene that Quintus is ambitious and is looking for lieutenants with which to form a new brotherhood. Maximus was an aspirant on latrine duty, not yet considered worthy of becoming a squire when he was arrested on suspicion of harming a brother. Though he denied this allegation, I think it's clear that Quintus believed Maximus harmed Dane to take their place. He saw this act as ambitious and he promoted Maximus and sent him on a mission. Maximus has now returned wearing the clothes of his fallen knight. And not only did he not have the one object Quintus sent him to fetch, but he also deceitfully brought a fake version back with him. To cap it off, Dane has just made it clear that no, Maximus didn't hurt them to get ahead. While this clears Maximus of one allegation of harming a fellow brother, it also should tell Quintus that he was wrong about Maximus. He isn't the ambitious man Quintus thought he was. Despite this, for some reason, Quintus makes Maximus a part of his plans for a new brotherhood. The only sense I see in this comes when he says, "Your entire life you've been looking for a home, build one with me." This makes me think that he's been keeping an eye on Maximus for some time. As to why Maximus would interest him so, I don't know. Along with that, we see a cleric checking the false Wilzig's head for the artifact using the same device that Thaddeus used to track the ghoul. Does this mean that the radiation trail that Thaddeus and Maximus were following was the artifact in Wilzig's head and not the ghoul? It would explain why they followed it into the water. This would also tell us that Thaddeus doesn't have as great a knowledge of the equipment as he thought. Anyway, I didn't see anything here that I didn't like, nor anything necessarily lore-breaking, so let's move on to the new lore elements. Having seen Philly before, this scene shows us more of the nature of this new Brotherhood of Steel. In the past, they've taken bunkers if possible, or old buildings in disuse to serve as their bases. Here, they stole an entire town from its residents. Aside from a few times in their history where they were friendly defenders of the wasteland, the Brotherhood have been a morally gray, self-interested force focused on cataloging and preserving technology. This new iteration of the Brotherhood under Arthur Maxson has shifted from morally gray to evil, and we'll see even more of that later in this episode. We also see the Brotherhood leaning more into the religious when we see a cleric sprinkle holy water on Maximus and perform last rites. Lastly, in episode 2, Knight Titus told Maximus that the Brotherhood would subject him to a blood eagle execution. It appears that this was a lie, as this scene shows that the Brotherhood of Steel performs executions via a gunshot to the back of the head. With that said, let's take a look at what we learned about these characters in this scene. This encounter went about as well as it possibly could have gone for Maximus. Returning with a fake head and in his knight's uniform without his armor, he's really lucky not to be dead. Though relieved to be alive, Maximus is uncomfortable with Elder Cleric Quintus's plans for a new brotherhood. Whether it's because he's planning to leave and go live with Lucy, or because the Elder is planning a schism, I don't know. Dane reveals that they are the one responsible for the razor in their boot. We'll see more on this in a future scene. Lastly, we learn that Elder Cleric Quintus is unhappy with the current state of the Brotherhood. He remarks that they once ruled the wasteland. It seems that he's on the verge of creating a schism within the Brotherhood to found a new order. I believe that he's planning to use the artifact in Dr. Wilzig's neck to make that new order a force to be reckoned with. On to Section 2. Lucy arrives at the Griffith Observatory, Moldaver's headquarters, and she is ushered inside. On to the good aspects. I thought parts of the setting were quite well done, like the exterior wall and gate of the partially ruined observatory. I enjoyed seeing the ghoul Lucy saved from the Super Duper Mart here. It's one of those moments that feels like the game when you save some ancillary character and they show up again. With that said, there's a lot to this scene that's confusing. Let's start off with the fact that we see no words exchanged here. We see Lucy approach the gate, they let her in, and they escort her to Moldaver. Why? The guards are waiting for a doctor who deserted the Enclave. They may have been informed by Ma June that she sent Dr. Wilzig with a Vault Dweller and Lucy is an obvious Vault Dweller. But she's here with a head, not a man. Not only do they not question her on why she's carrying the doctor's head, they don't ask her any questions at all. They simply escort her straight to Moldaver. This implies that they knew Dr. Wilzig was coming as just a head, but how did they know that? While that was confusing, there are a couple of elements that I thought were just bad. The farm field was poorly done. First off, all the corn looks really fake. Every stalk is yellow with either dark green or light green leaves. Maybe Jonathan Nolan didn't have the time or funds to emulate his brother Christopher and plant a full field of corn, but I think it could have looked better. Beyond this, there are workers pushing some sort of equipment through the field. I can't tell whether these are aerators or seed drills, but either way, it's the wrong time in the growing process to be using this equipment. The corn is clearly nearing harvest, meaning that neither aeration nor planting is necessary. Lastly, the corn ears are all yellow and look like they're missing their husks. If you're unfamiliar, when growing, ears of corn are covered in a leafy husk that protects them from moisture loss and pests. In the show, the ears are all exposed. I'm actually not as annoyed by this as I otherwise would be, as this matches the appearance of corn in Fallout 4 and 76. While the ears in that game are more mottled in color than the plain yellow of the show, they also don't have husks on the ears. While these things bothered me, I didn't see anything lore breaking, so let's talk about new lore elements we saw here. We now know that Moldaver's outpost is located at the Griffith Observatory. To be frank, we kind of already knew this, but it's confirmed here. I looked it up and Griffith Observatory seems to be the only actual observatory in the LA area. There's another planetarium, an observatory organization, and overlooks that people refer to as observatories, but Griffith Observatory is the only actual observatory with a proper telescope. When the ghoul heard from Tommy that Moldaver was at the observatory, that's effectively when we learned this, but here we have it confirmed. I do have questions about the nature of this camp, but I'll save those for the season wrap-up video. With that said, let's talk about what we learned about the characters here. Lucy seems to be a known quantity in the Wasteland now. Much like the Lone Wanderer, Courier, and Sole Survivor, she has some fame for her actions in the preceding days of her adventure. Specifically, we see this when she's recognized by the ghoul that she freed at the Super Duper Mart. Moldaver's reputation gets a bit of rehabilitation here. Up to this point, we knew that before the war she was an inventor, and that after somehow surviving the 219 years since the bombs, she became a leader known as the Flame Mother. Besides this, she led a raid on Vault 33 that killed a lot of innocent people. We might have assumed that somehow in the aftermath of the bombs that she became a ruthless raider warlord of sorts. The fact that her settlement is host to children and escaped organ banks seems to throw a wrench into her being an overtly malevolent force post-war. There's a lot more to say on Moldaver and her raid on Vault 33 specifically, but that'll have to wait for the season wrap-up video. For the moment, on to Section 3. The ghoul and CX-404 trek across the wasteland. The two of them walk past ruined structures as they make their way to Moldaver. This scene serves as an intro to a flashback of a trip Cooper Howard takes to Vault-Tec HQ, so let's move on to that part in Section 4. Cooper Howard drives his wife Barb to work at Vault-Tec's LA headquarters. Once in the parking lot, he takes the listening device given to him by Ms. Williams and puts it in his ear. Bud Askins arrives, talks Cooper's ear off about his management initiative Bud's Buds, and then walks into the office with Barb Howard. When Cooper's listening device and the device it's paired to, Barb's Pip-Boy, become too distant from each other, Cooper follows Barb into the office. Let's get into the good aspects of this scene. I like that Bud Askins drives up in a Fusion Flea. It's a vehicle that's been part of the Fallout universe since Fallout 3, and I thought it was great that they made a prop version for the show. I also enjoyed Cooper looking pleadingly to Barb for a way out of the conversation with Bud about Bud's Buds. With that said, let's talk about the one part I had a question about. It's obvious that Cooper sabotaged his wife's car so that he could drive her into work, so that he could listen in on Vault-Tec business. Once at the office, it quickly became clear that he wouldn't be able to do this from the parking lot. Did he go into this operation with a plan to listen in no matter what? Or would he simply have chalked it up as a loss had Bud not mentioned that it was a big day? It's clear that he wants to know what's going on at Vault-Tec, but he's also quite nervous about the spying. Would he have gone this far without Bud unknowingly dangling this bait in front of him? I didn't see anything here that I didn't like, nor anything lore related, so let's get into the characters. This scene told me two things about Cooper Howard. First, he's capable of planning a reasonable excuse for having to drive his wife into work. I don't think he screwed up her oil change accidentally. And second, that he's not comfortable with spying. He's clearly constantly having to settle his nerves. He wants to know what Vault-Tec's up to, but I'm sure he would prefer not to be the one doing the spying. We learn here that Barb Howard is reasonably technically skilled. Bud tells Barb that she should get the IT guys to look at her Pip-Boy, and she tells him that she has plans to fix the problem herself. In this scene, we learn that Bud Askins drives a Fusion Flea and has a management program called Bud's Buds. Along with this, he appears to be a fan of German polka, which, interestingly enough, is a subtle reference back to the very end of episode 7. Along with this, it's clear that he wants a closer relationship with the Howards. Let's move on to section 5. Within the Griffith Observatory, Lucy finally meets Moldaver and sees her father imprisoned in a cage. She delivers Dr. Wilzig's head, and Moldaver extracts the piece of tech he injected before he fled the Enclave. When Lucy wants to take her father and leave, Moldaver offers to tell her the truth about who Hank McClane really is. On to the good aspects. I enjoyed the set they created here. For clarity, this is the planetarium of the Griffith Observatory. The large piece of equipment at the center of the room, known as a star projector, once displayed the stars of the night sky on the domed ceiling of the room. This location as Moldaver's office, combined with a gaping hole in the wall creating an amazing vista of the ruined LA skyline, looks great. I also like the billowing NCR flag, the equipment, the cage in which they hold Hank McClane, and the meal set before Moldaver. Everything works well together to create a space that feels appropriate to an endgame location. With that covered, I did have a question about this scene. Lucy says that she tried to stuff a grenade down the head's throat. Was she lying here as a way to show her disdain for Moldaver? From what we've seen, Lucy only had one, maybe two nights with a head. The night after she cut it off, and last night, assuming there was a night between when she recovered the head and when she arrived at the observatory. All we saw her do with the head was to look it over to find out why she was carrying it, and stuff a tracker up its nose. As far as I know, she never had a grenade this entire time. With that covered, there wasn't anything about the scene that I didn't like, nor anything lore-breaking, but there is some new lore to cover. Moldaver's table is heavily laden with different foods, some of which we haven't seen in the post-war world of Fallout before. Some of these foods I couldn't exactly identify, but they looked almost like croissants and cauliflower. What we can see here are apples, pears, potatoes, tomatoes, grits, and a two-headed pig. The grits make sense, this settlement grows corn. As for the apples, pears, potatoes, and tomatoes, from the Philly market, we've seen a higher variety of produce here in the LA area. I think the best explanation for this is the efforts of the New California Republic's science programs. As for the two-headed pig, as far as I know, it's the first pig we've seen in the Fallout universe. It tells us that, like Brahmin, rad pigs, or whatever they're called, have two heads. I would have expected them to be more in line with the appearance of wild boars than be two-headed, but maybe that's just me. With that covered, let's talk about the characters. Lucy is happy to see her father and is ready to go home as soon as possible. She shows restraint here when speaking to Moldaver, aside from when she drops Dr. Wilzig's head onto her plate. I think she lied to Moldaver when she talked about trying to shove a grenade into the neck hole, but otherwise did quite well to maintain her composure. Hank McClane is sunburned and a bit scruffy, but otherwise appears unharmed. Moldaver shows herself to be confident and callous. Her comment, "It's my turn to host, isn't it?" is fairly dark, as it references when she showed up at Lucy's wedding and had a dozen of her friends and neighbors murdered. Also, she's enjoying a feast of sorts here, while her people outside look to be eating soup from a communal pot. Either she was expecting Lucy and was showing off, or she eats like this on a regular basis. Again, there's more to discuss in the wrap-up video. Let's move on to section 6. In Vault 31, Norm McClane meets Brain on a Roomba. When Brain on a Roomba sees that Norm isn't Hank, he scans Norm, who reveals that he is Hank's son. Distraught by Norm's trespass, Brain on a Roomba attempts to stop him. Undeterred, Norm advances into the vault. On to the good aspects. I loved the dramatic music that played when Brain on a Roomba raised his needle, declared "Initiate Protocol 53," and skidded off course into a crate. I also enjoyed the way he waved the needle when he said, "I won't answer your questions unless you let me inject you with this." He had pretty much no ability to actually stop Norm, so he had to attempt ridiculous gimmicks. With that covered, I did have a couple questions about this material. How long has Brain on a Roomba been trapped in this predicament? When Norm found him, he was repeatedly banging into a mop handle. When did this happen, and how much longer would he have been trapped if Norm hadn't come along? Along with this, why was there water in the mop bucket? We soon find out that Brain on a Roomba is the only resident of the vault that comes to this area, so why, if he can't mop, is there a mop bucket with water in it? Anyway, I didn't see anything here that I didn't like, nor anything lore-breaking, so let's move on to the new lore elements. We see in Brain on a Roomba, and yes, that's his name according to Amazon Prime's X-Ray feature. Once we know explicitly to whom this brain belonged, I'll use that name. Anyway, we see in Brain on a Roomba a different form of RoboBrain, perhaps even an early prototype of the RoboBrain. It's possible that the individual wanted to be stored in a device that would allow electronic control of systems but no physical agency, but I highly doubt that. I think it's possible that this represents an early attempt at the creation of the RoboBrain. This robot also shows the ability to instantaneously scan organisms, determine their DNA profile, and compare it against a database of DNA profiles. I believe that this scan was the first of its kind that we've seen in the Fallout universe. With that said, on to character traits. Norm overcomes the fear we saw him exhibit as he entered Vault 31 at the end of the last episode. He's quite close to reaching answers to every question he has and more. Brain on a Roomba seems to have an affinity for German polka. On to section 7. Let me just preface this by saying that this next section is one of the longest and combines elements from 4 places in both the pre-war and post-war timeline, but as all elements are interwoven, it didn't feel right to treat each part as a separate section. At Vault-Tec HQ, Cooper Howard has come to Barb's office to be close enough to her Pip-Boy to hear what it's broadcasting. The broadcast reveals that in the Vault-Tec HQ conference room, senior executives at Vault-Tec, Repcon, Robco, Big Mountain, and West-Tec are meeting. The topic of discussion is Vault-Tec's vaults, and their desire to collaborate with these other corporations with regards to their vaults. Meanwhile, in Vault 31, Brain on a Roomba reveals himself to be the overseer of Vault 31 as he chases Norm MacLean deeper into the vault. Here, Norm discovers row upon row of cryogenic sleeping caskets. At this point, Brain on a Roomba is revealed to be Bud Askins, as he refers to those inside the caskets as Bud's buds, his buds. Back in the Vault-Tec HQ conference room, Barb reveals that Vaults 31, 32, and 33 were an idea of Bud's. She suggests to the collected industry heads that they produce their own ideas for vaults. Meanwhile, in Vault 31, Norm asks if the residents of 32 and 33 are servants to be controlled by those in 31. Bud rejects this suggestion as it makes the plan seem unethical, instead stating that they are genetic stock to create super managers meant to inherit the Earth once Vault-Tec has wiped the surface clean. Meanwhile, at the Legion of Doom, I meant the Vault-Tec HQ conference room, the industry heads detail their plans for vault experiments. When Robert House of Robco suggests that the speculated end of the world here is just hypothetical, Barb Howard reveals that Vault-Tec has its own plans to drop the bombs themselves. You know what, I don't think I did make a mistake. Legion of Doom was probably right. Anyway, in Barb's office, Cooper Howard, who has overheard all of this, stands in stunned disbelief, numb to the fact that a young Betty Pearson is introducing him to young Hank MacLean. At the Griffith Observatory, Moldaver explains all this to Lucy MacLean, revealing to her that her father lived before the war. In Barb's office, Cooper Howard listens to Barb talking about how they'll end the world to end factionalism and war, while Hank MacLean asks for an autograph. Finally, at the Griffith Observatory, Moldaver tells Lucy about how her father has lied to her, not only about himself, but about her mother. She tells Lucy that she knows she came to the surface not just to find her father, but to find out why Moldaver took him in the first place. On to the good aspects. All told, the sets of these scenes were great, from the cryogenic sleeping chamber in Vault 31 to the conference room in Vault-Tec HQ. I liked the movie posters in Barb's office, thought that the actress to play young Betty Pearson was well chosen, and that the de-aged version of Hank MacLean was serviceable. The music for the scene was well chosen. Lastly, I thought Cooper Howard's reaction to learning the true nature of his wife was well done. In a single statement, he had learned more about his wife's character than he had in their years of marriage. In episode 6, he told her, "I know you always tried to do the right thing." Here, he learned that her version of the right thing was wiping out vast swaths of the globe's population so that those who emerged from the vaults would be ready to form a new society. His vacant, slack-jawed stare was perfect. There wasn't anything here that confused me, but there were several things that I did not like. First, the way that these titans of industry relate their ideas is simplistic and comically evil. Generally, people at this stratum of society try to dress up their intentions. For example, instead of, "We could pump psychotropic drugs into the air supply," Sinclair could have said something like, "The latest rounds of civil unrest have been pushing the limits of our crowd control capabilities. We could test population control methods in these vaults like pumping psychotropic drugs into the air supply or suggestion via white noise. Instead of we could separate parents and children and only the smartest kids reach adulthood, Julia Masters could have said, we've barely tapped the potential of human evolution. The vaults could allow us to perform a proper test of eugenics, this time without the burden of societal ethics. We could use a vault to try to breed a better human. Again, restated, the plans are perfectly evil enough for this group, but they would have been shrouding their evil in the veneer of scientific inquiry. Next, Robert House has a very stupid line here. There's a lot of earning potential in the end of the world. This is nonsense. There's earning potential in selling the end of the world, not in the end itself. This leads to a bigger problem here. These companies wouldn't make money from this. The results of these experiments wouldn't be available until after the end of the world, making them useless to a profit-making venture. Beyond this, unless these companies did as Vault-Tec planned and preserved themselves in a vault, they wouldn't be able to draw upon the knowledge gained from the vault experiments. I also didn't think that it made much sense for House to be involved here at all. He has his own thing going on and didn't seem to be involved in this kind of stuff in Fallout New Vegas. It feels out of character. The same could be said for Sinclair, who wasn't a comic book villain in Fallout New Vegas, and didn't work for Big Mountain either. Lastly, Vault-Tec's plan is really dumb. Factionalism is a part of human nature. I guarantee you, if Vault-Tec had succeeded in wiping out all life on Earth, aside from those who sheltered in the vaults, within a few decades of building their new world, there would be factions within the new Vault-Tec humanity that would result in war. Besides this, there are one or potentially two lore-breaking elements here, depending on when this meeting takes place. I think that, like the other plans, Leon von Felden's idea is a comically evil one, using a vault full of illegal immigrant test subjects to create super soldiers, but it's also stupid. Let's say that his people succeeded in creating these illegal immigrant super soldiers. What would keep these newly powerful soldiers from seizing the vault for themselves? Regardless, my main point here is that the idea might be lore-breaking. In a previous video, I stated that I read the date on the newspaper Cooper read during the ad wrap party to be from Thursday, January 4th, 2074. If this date is accurate, and this meeting takes place in the days following that party, then West-Tech's Super Soldier program wasn't underway yet. FEV research didn't begin until 2075, and super mutants weren't a thing until 2076. Along with that, Repcon was bought by Robco sometime before the bombs. As to exactly when, we don't know, but it needs to be mentioned. Again, my objections here are based on when this meeting takes place, and we're not 100% sure on when that is. I'm assuming Monday, January 8th, 2074. With that covered, let's move on to the new lore elements. In Barb Howard's office, we see two new posters for Cooper Howard movies. Gun, a western, and Under the Covers, a noir film featuring Vera Keyes. If you weren't aware or had forgotten, Vera Keyes was first introduced in Fallout New Vegas in the Dead Money DLC. Next, we see here that House, Sinclair, Von Felden, and Masters were part of this plot against the world. As I stated before, this doesn't really make sense for House or Sinclair. Beyond this, Repcon was a rocket company. Why were they making a milk delivery robot? This section creates the lore that some of the Vault experiments had their sources outside Vault-Tec. Lastly, we now have three levels of Vault-Tec's priorities: subliminal, liminal, and superliminal. Simpsons joke aside, the public purpose of Vault-Tec is to build shelters to survive the nuclear apocalypse. Behind the scenes, Vault-Tec is maintaining a sense of fear to drive purchases of these shelters. Secretly, Vault-Tec is planning to remake the world in their image by wiping out all human life on Earth not affiliated with Vault-Tec. With that said, on to character traits. Bud Askins appears to have a sense of humor when it comes to people bad-mouthing Vault-Tec. That being said, he views every other human who isn't us as competitors. From the faces he was making, I don't think that he likes the idea of sharing control of the vaults with other corporations. Lastly, in order to oversee his program, Bud has become a form of robo-brain. How he hasn't gone insane in the 219 years since the war is beyond me. Though Barb Howard has made her husband think that she's just going along to get along, she's clearly drinking the company Kool-Aid and is mixing some up herself. Cooper Howard has had his worst fears about Vault-Tec confirmed. In fact, what he's learned has likely gone far worse than his worst fears. We don't know if his listening device will be discovered or if he'll confront his wife, but the fact that they were divorced by the time of the Great War makes perfect sense. Betty Pearson and Stephanie Harper were alive before the war, and in fact were probably around the same age at that time. They're only so distant in age now because Betty was released from cryogenic storage before Stephanie. Hank McClane was alive before the war, was an assistant to Barb Howard at that time, and was a huge fan of Cooper Howard. The fact that we saw him watching The Man from Dead Horse at the start of episode 1 takes on new significance. Lastly, he was released from cryogenic stasis on August 9th, 2268. Moldaver refers to Lucy as kind. I think we have to assume that she learned this from the Super Duper Mark Ghoul, as nothing she displayed to Moldaver suggested this. On to Section 8. In Brotherhood-controlled Philly, Maximus and Dane catch up with each other as the Brotherhood prepares for a raid on the Griffith Observatory. This was a fairly short scene that focused heavily on character, so let's cover that. It's clear from this scene just how deep the friendship between Maximus and Dane runs. Maximus trusts Dane implicitly. There's no way he would tell anyone he didn't trust so soundly that he was planning to leave. Along with this, while he revealed the location of Dr. Wilzig's head to Elder Cleric Quintus, it's clear that this was part of his plan to get back to Lucy. Along with this, we have a proper conclusion to the story of Dane's injury. Initially, it wasn't clear if Maximus was the one responsible for Dane's injury. I didn't think he was, but at the time he was clearly enraged that he wasn't chosen for advancement, was envious of Dane, and we didn't see everything Maximus did that day. While Dane admitted to self-harm at the start of this episode, it could have simply been a ploy to save Maximus's life. Dane's apology to Maximus made it 100% clear that Dane's admission was real. Dane did not think much of Maximus's plan to escape the Brotherhood. Lastly, Dane and Thaddeus seem to share a fear of doing anything to betray the Brotherhood. On to Section 9. At the Griffith Observatory, Moldaver tells Lucy about her mother, Rose. How Rose discovered that there were people living on the surface, in spite of the official story that the surface was too radioactive for life. How she left the vault, taking her children with her, and went to Shady Sands. How Hank McClane had come after her, and when she refused to come home, how he took his children and destroyed Shady Sands. It's at this point that Lucy realizes that the ghoul sitting at the table is what's left of her mother. Moldaver tells Lucy that she kidnapped Hank because the cold fusion technology concealed within Dr. Wilzig's neck can only be unlocked by high-level Vault-Tec employees. Though Hank spent this time telling Lucy that Moldaver was a lying murderer, Lucy tells her father to give Moldaver the code. Hank inputs the code and the technology begins to turn on. On to the good aspects. I thought that Ella Purnell did an amazing job conveying the fluctuating emotions of Lucy, from disbelief to sadness and rage. The music in this scene was also very well done. Beyond that, the code that Hank McClane enters, 10-10-97, is the release date of the first Fallout, October 10th, 1997. On to the confusing elements. What would have been siphoning the vault's water? There's nothing near the vault on the surface as of 2296. This is an interesting reversal of the situation at the NCR sharecropper farms in Fallout New Vegas. In that case, a water quality issue leads the courier to Vault 34. Next, why were Rose and Lucy still wearing vault suits in the flashback? Was this just so that we wouldn't see them in normal clothing in an earlier flashback, or was this when they had just first arrived at Shady Sands? Where was Norm in this flashback? Where are all the people on the streets of Shady Sands? Lastly, where did Moldaver get the cold fusion receptacle and terminals? These feel like fairly specialized pieces of equipment. I think it would have been cool if she had had a line like, "I had to scavenge all these from my old lab," or something like that. On to the bad element. The way Hank's lines and Moldaver's lines basically went one right after another, without really interrupting each other, despite the fact that Hank was trying to talk over Moldaver, kinda took me out of it as it didn't seem realistic. On to the lore breaking. In the flashback to Shady Sands, we see an obelisk and well in front of the Shady Sands courthouse. This is a reference to the obelisk and well found in Shady Sands in Fallout. The problem is that these elements were gone by Fallout 2. That being said, this is the least of the lore issues with Shady Sands in the Fallout show. I covered some of these before, but I'm going to cover everything in depth in the wrap-up video. On to the new lore elements in this scene. This scene is massive in terms of the lore that it reveals for Vault 33, Shady Sands, and Vault-Tec. Let's cover them each in turn. First of all, this tells us that Rose McClane took Lucy and Norm from Vault 33 to Shady Sands and was chased there by Hank. Acts that the general population of the vault wasn't aware of. Second, this scene tells us that Hank McClane destroyed Shady Sands after he extracted his children from the city. Lastly, this scene tells us that Vault-Tec, as of at least 2277, has access to nuclear weaponry. The exact nature of this weaponry and where it is stored is unknown. Personally, I'm hoping that the automated nuclear missile silos of Appalachia had a role to play here. I'll talk more about these elements in my comprehensive video covering the season, as there are both good and very poorly thought out parts of this story told in snippets across several episodes. With that said, on to character traits. It appears that Hank McClane is responsible for the destruction of Shady Sands. He does deny this, but given the amount of his lies revealed here, and the fact that the destruction of the city seems to so shortly follow his reclamation of his kids, does seem to point to it being true. Exactly how he accomplished this feat remains to be seen. Prior to the fall of Shady Sands, Lucy McClane and her brother Norm were both taken to the city by their mother, Rose McClane. Rose is now a feral ghoul that Moldaver keeps close at hand. It seems from these scenes and from production content that Moldaver and Rose had some sort of relationship. Lucy's foundation has now completely crumbled. Her dedication to the mission of the vaults was surely shaken when she discovered that Shady Sands had existed and what happened in Vault 4. Now, she has learned that Vault-Tec is responsible for the destruction of Shady Sands, and may well be responsible for the Great War as well. The other primary focus of her life was family. The fact that her father was responsible for the destruction of Shady Sands and the ghoulification of her mother is devastating for Lucy as well. What she has left at this point is a brother, inaccessible to her in the vault, and Maximus. The rest of the world has been shattered. On to Section 10. In Vault 31, Norm looks over the information from a console, listing the details of those who have been revived from the vault over the centuries. When he's done, he tries to leave the vault only to find the exit sealed by Bud Askins. Bud tells Norm that he can't leave as he knows too much, and he has to stay until the time is right for Reclamation Day. As that day may not come for centuries, Bud tells him he should use his father's cryogenic casket to pass the centuries. On to the good aspects. This scene did a great job creating a terrifyingly suffocating atmosphere for Norm. The fact that he was sealed in with no hope of escape is horrifying. With that said, I did have a question about one thing here. Why are we seeing so few people listed as reactivated? Back in episode 5, we saw at least 8 dwellers of Vault 31 that had been transferred to Vault 33. These names started with Robert Olson, Ava West, George Yaffe, and included the names we see here like Patricia Peters, Alexander Bomer, Lawrence Ronald, Betty Pearson, and Hank McClane. Why is there only one member of this list, Ian Jackson, who is known to be a dweller of Vault 32? There wasn't anything here I didn't like, nor anything lore related, so let's move on to character information. As previously stated, I don't know how Bud has not gone insane due to the 219 years of isolation. Here, he laments the fact that he can't sleep through the centuries like his buds. Who knows, given the state of things in Vault 32 before the Triennial Trade Raid, maybe Bud has lost it. Norm McClane is now the man who knew too much, and is condemned to sleeping in a cryogenic pod until Reclamation Day. This is really kinda crazy to consider. What will the people of 32 think about his unexplained disappearance? Beyond questions he'd surely like to ask his father, there are things like, what if when I wake up everyone I've ever known is dead and gone? On to Section 11. As the cold fusion equipment at Griffith Observatory spins up, Hank McClane attempts to justify his actions to his daughter. When an alarm announces the arrival of Brotherhood raiders, Moldaver and the guards rush out to deal with the incoming enemies, leaving Hank and Lucy alone. Outside, rockets take down one of the Brotherhood vertibirds, but the remainder land. While the Brotherhood forces push into the outpost, Moldaver's forces, now revealed to be remnants of the New California Republic, fight back. Inside, Hank continues to attempt to justify his actions against Shady Sands, including the effective murder of his wife. Maximus joins a contingent of forces that enter the observatory and push forward until the ghoul stops them. The ghoul uses his knowledge of power armor to wipe out this tip of the spear, leaving none but Maximus alive, who abandons his brothers to enter the planetarium. Hank convinces Maximus to free him, while Lucy continues to process her shattered life in silence. As Maximus prepares to lead them away, Lucy reveals her father's role in the fall of Shady Sands. Maximus attempts to shoot the now power armor-clad Hank, but Lucy's father slams the squire's head into the star projector pedestal, rendering him unconscious. In response to this, Lucy holds Hank at gunpoint. While she doesn't pull the trigger, the ghoul does, shooting Hank in the face. The ghoul demands to know the whereabouts of his wife and daughter, and Hank flees. With Brotherhood reinforcements on their way, the ghoul convinces Lucy to come with him as he chases Hank to wherever Vault-Tec leadership is held up. Lucy mercy kills her mother, and she and the ghoul depart the observatory, leaving Maximus unconscious on the floor. On to the good elements. I thought it was really interesting that when the Brotherhood chose to assault this location, that they didn't have a clue as to what they would find. If they'd bothered to scout it for a day or two beforehand, potentially even sent in a spy, they may have discovered that the site had surface-to-air missiles. While this iteration of the Brotherhood views squires as expendable, I don't think they see knights in the same way. If that's the case, and they had known about the surface-to-air missiles, they would have landed somewhere nearby, out of sight, or at least out of range of the rockets, and attacked on foot. The fact that they didn't do this shows how reckless the leadership of this version of the Brotherhood is. Along with this, they're assaulting a site to take cold fusion tech for themselves. They had no other reason to be here, and didn't even bother to talk to the people at the outpost first. There's no way Moldaver would have handed it over, but it's telling that they didn't even try. I thought that the battle scene was well done. I liked watching the NCR troops attempt different strategies to take the Knights down, including the group that swarmed Knight and held him down while they tried to fire in the gaps of his armor. I also enjoyed some of the shots of the Knights just laying waste to the NCR just because it displayed the effect of storming a location in power armor. I also enjoyed watching the Headless Knight walk into the planetarium. It's clear that the assistive movement systems of the power armor kept working temporarily after the Knight's death and just kept propelling the corpse forward. The shot of Lucy pointing the pistol at her father in rage is one of my favorite shots of the series. The light of the golden hour, the sadness and anger on her face, and the angle is great. Lastly, Cooper Howard reintroducing himself to Hank was excellent. The wound on Hank's face, the ghoul using the line from the man from Dead Horse that Hank loved so much, and the dawning realization on Hank's face were all great. That said, I did have a couple of things about the scene I wondered about. First of all, we see a machine gunner get shot in the head and then an image of blood spraying on Korn. I originally thought that the machine gunner was the source of that blood, but it's clear from the machine gunner's location that they were not the owner of that splattered blood. Second, if the ghoul is able to take Knights out with such ease, why was he so stymied by Maximus and Philly? I've seen two excuses for this. First, I've seen it claimed that he was toying with Maximus, but why would he do this? Dr. Wilzig, his target, was getting away. Fighting Maximus slowed him down and let Dr. Wilzig get a head start. Along with this, Maximus takes some pretty nasty shots at the ghoul. Why would he continue to risk his life and the bounty just to toy with Maximus? Second, I've seen it claimed that this was the doing of the tempered lining in Knight Titus's armor, as referenced on the vertebrate flight and by Lucy in the train tunnel. The claim is that the tempered lining fixes the armor issue and makes it so that the ghoul can't kill him in the same way. While this seems like the most plausible reason, I have to note that Maximus believes that the tempered lining improves mobility. Generally speaking, when improving mobility, if there's a change in protection, it's a reduction, not an increase. Maximus could have been wrong about the effects of the tempered lining. Anyway, there wasn't anything here that I didn't like, nor anything necessarily lore-breaking aside from Hank McClane's instant mastery of power-armored flight, so let's move on to new lore elements. First off, it seems to be the case that Moldaver's forces are what remains of the NCR, or at least that's how they represent themselves. How the NCR was destroyed by the loss of a single city, even if that city is their capital, doesn't make that much sense to me. The NCR was created from a union of city-states. Why didn't the Hub, or Angel's Boneyard, or Reading, or Dayglow, or some other town take its place? I hope in the second season we get some sort of clue as to why the NCR disintegrated instead of reconstituting in one of their remaining cities. Next, it appears that the flaws of the T-45 power armor referred to by Cooper Howard in episode 6 are present in T-60 power armor as well. With that said, onto character traits. Lucy has lost her father. While he still lives, the man he was is dead to her. The fact that he nuked Shady Sands, including her mother, and feels no remorse tells her that he's nothing like the man she thought he was. As I stated in the review of the last episode, when Maximus wanted to keep Vault 4's fusion core, I loved it when Lucy said, if my dad found out that I destroyed an entire community to save him, that'd break his heart. The fact that Vault 4's population is heavy on Shady Sands refugees is icing on the cake. The fact that she goes so willingly with the ghoul after how he treated her is also a sign of her dedication to righting the wrongs that Vault-Tec caused. Hank is a true believer in his Buds training. He agrees utterly with the belief that Vault-Tec should wipe out all non-Vault-Tec life on Earth to end factionalism and war. What exactly he hopes to find and fling from Lucy and the ghoul, we'll just have to wait and see. Maximus managed to survive the battle relatively unscathed, and was on the verge of attaining his new greatest desire, a life in peace with Lucy. Moldaver was apparently the head of these NCR remnants. We saw a flashback of her in Shady Sands before it was destroyed. What exactly was her role in the NCR generally and in Shady Sands specifically? How was she able to seize control of the remnants? Why is she called the Flame Mother? All questions I hope we see answered in Season 2. We finally know the true reason that the ghoul has gone on living all these years. The ghoulification kept him alive physically, but it was the hunt for Barb and Janie that really kept him going. I have to wonder how he knows they're still alive. I have to assume that he brought Janie to some Vault-Tec safe point, or that they found him and took her. But why does he assume that they're still around after all these years? Sure, he knew Moldaver and Hank from before the war, so now he knows that there are people who survived over the centuries, but why does he think Barb and Janie are still around? It is of course possible that he didn't think they were still around, but still wanted to find their fates. It's of course possible that he didn't think that they were still around, and still wanted to find out their fates. In this version of events, the discovery of Moldaver and Hank would create the possibility in his mind that Barb and Janie are still around. Anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing where this hunt brings him. On to Section 12. In the Griffith Observatory Planetarium, Maximus regains consciousness and looks for Lucy. Wounded, Moldaver enters the room and activates Cold Fusion. She takes a seat next to Rose and asks Maximus what the Brotherhood will do with unlimited power. She dies of blood loss as the skyline of LA lights up. Dane leaves a contingent of Brotherhood reinforcements into the room and proclaims Maximus the champion of their victory. On to the good aspects of the scene. I'm not sure it's a good thing, but it did give me a chuckle to think about the irony that turning the planetarium into a power plant has caused enough light pollution to make the observatory practically useless for stargazing again. I will say that the sight of the Los Angeles skyline lighting up was impressive, but I did have a couple of questions about this scene. First of all, how is the city lighting up? I fully get that the cold fusion is producing an enormous amount of energy through science magic, but how are all those circuits and light bulbs still functional after multiple nuclear blasts, 219 years of sitting dormant, and scavenging by wastelanders? Note that I'm not actually referring to cold fusion as magic, I'm just making fun of the highly improbable science here. I did the same thing when referring to the green ending of Mass Effect 3, when the space magic merges organics with technology without any reasonable explanation as to how. Next, why is Moldaver friendly with Maximus? She doesn't know who he is, aside from being a member of the same Brotherhood that just murdered her people. Other than the fact that he didn't try to kill her, why does she assume he'd want to stop the Brotherhood? There wasn't anything I didn't like, nor anything lore-breaking, so let's move on to new lore elements. First of all, this is the first application of cold fusion we've seen for the sole purpose of power generation. As stated before, cold fusion was integrated into the Gek, and we've seen that tech utilized here and there throughout the series, but this is the first time we've seen cold fusion utilized specifically to generate power for the electrical grid. This technology could effectively put an end to the struggles of daily life for many Wastelanders. Second, it appears that unless this was a new and unofficial thing that Dane was doing here, that the Brotherhood has a form of field commissioning for their knights based on popular support. With that said, on to character traits. Sadly, Moldaver finally managed to make her dream a reality when she had less than 5 minutes to live. I'm glad she got to see it function, but this is a really sad way for her to finally realize her dreams. Along with this, she appears to be wearing a ring where one would expect to find an engagement or wedding ring. She wasn't wearing this in the pre-war scenes. As previously stated, she did have some sort of relationship with Rose McClane, and this may or may not have been related. Maximus was knocked out by Hank before the ghoul came in, before Hank ran from the room, and before Lucy and the ghoul left to track Hank. It's entirely possible that he thinks that she left with her father, the man who destroyed Shady Sands, destroyed his childhood, and nearly killed him. Along with this, he clearly does not desire the glory that comes with being named the Slayer of Moldaver and the one who won them the battle. Despite Maximus's protests, Dane appears to have basically promoted Maximus to knight with their words, "All hail Maximus, that shalt be knight hereafter." On to section 13. The ghoul, Lucy, and CX-404 set out after Hank as the LA basin lights up around them. On to the good aspects. I really like that the Hollywood sign was apparently sponsored by Nuka-Cola, and that Nuka-Cola put their stamp on the famous landmark with a sign of their own. This is similar to the sign that indicated that Vault-Tec was funding the Griffith Observatory. I was surprised that Moldaver let that sign stay up, given that Vault-Tec was her arch enemy. I did have a couple of questions. I don't quite understand how the ghoul and Lucy got to this area. Looking at the real-world map, this area is fairly significantly west of the Griffith Observatory. That is to say, it's not really far west, but it's not just down the hill, and not only is this not observatory adjacent, from the next scene we know it's in the opposite direction of Hank McClane's direction of travel. Other than the fact that the ghoul, Lucy, and CX-404 are traveling together, there isn't much else to say about this. On to section 14. We see Hank McClane walking towards the rising sun. We next see a Deathclaw skull. The camera focuses on Hank's face, and we see that he's looking over the Mojave wasteland to the New Vegas skyline. On to the good aspects. I liked seeing the New Vegas skyline and the Deathclaw skull as they indicate things we can hope to see in the next season. Other than this, we know that Hank McClane appears to have come to the Mojave wasteland in search of Vault-Tec. We'll just have to see where he finds his quarry next season. Alright, that should do it for episode 8. One last video on season 1 to go, covering the season as a whole. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron of Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons, Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, Ahotep, Despy, Electric Head, Hero Cunning, Laced Cake, E, and NB Mole Miner for their support. I also want to specifically thank Dark Malcontent for helping with this video's script. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.